My name is Rosalind Blackthorne. I'm 68 years old, a widow, and the quiet owner of the Grandview Hospitality Empire. For 43 years, I built my fortune in the shadows, while others took the spotlight. But none of that mattered the moment I opened that email from my own daughter. Mother, after careful consideration, we've decided your presence at the wedding would create unnecessary tension. Please respect our decision. She uninvited me from her wedding at my own $40 million hotel chain. She had no idea who really owned the keys. Hold up, I'm curious where you're listening from. And if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. People see me as the grieving widow who fades into expensive wallpaper at charity galas. They whisper about poor Rosalind, lost without her dynamic husband, probably living off his life insurance. Let them whisper. Charles always said the most dangerous people are the ones everyone underestimates. He taught me that power worn quietly cuts deeper than power displayed loudly. I wasn't always invisible. 43 years ago, I was a 25-year-old night manager at the struggling Pine Valley Motor Lodge, barely keeping the lights on with 12 rooms and a leaky roof. The owner was 3 months behind on everything: mortgage, utilities, staff wages. I worked double shifts, scrubbed bathrooms, changed linens, balanced books that never balanced, all for $4.50 an hour and the promise of experience. Charles found me there one rain-soaked Tuesday morning, mopping water from a ceiling leak, while simultaneously checking in a traveling salesman and answering complaint calls about the broken heating system. He watched me handle 3 crises without raising my voice or losing my composure. Later, he told me that's when he knew I was built for more than survival. I was built for empire. You don't just manage chaos, he said, over coffee in the lobby that smelled like pine sol and old cigarettes. You transform it into order. That's rare. Charles was a quiet investor, the kind of man who bought distressed properties and turned them profitable before anyone noticed his name on the paperwork. He offered to buy the Motor Lodge with one condition: I would run it. Not manage it, run it. Full authority, full responsibility, and a partnership stake that grew with every successful quarter. Why me? I asked. Because you see solutions where others see problems. And because you don't need applause to do exceptional work. We married 18 months later, not because of business convenience, but because somewhere between renovating those 12 rooms and planning our expansion into the next county, we'd fallen deeply, quietly in love. Charles was never the front man. He preferred boardrooms to ballrooms, spreadsheets to speeches. But he saw me, really saw me, in ways no one ever had. Together, we built Grandview Hospitality from that leaky motor lodge into a collection of 37 luxury properties across 6 states. Historic inns, mountain resorts, boutique hotels in city centers, and crown jewel conference centers that hosted Fortune 500 retreats and presidential campaign events. Charles handled acquisitions and financing. I handled operations, design, and the 1,000 invisible details that transform a place to sleep into an experience worth remembering. Our daughter Penelope arrived when we'd been married 8 years. She grew up in hotel lobbies, doing homework in managers' offices, learning to fold napkins into perfect triangles for special events. As a child, she was fascinated by the business, asking questions about occupancy rates, memorizing the names of regular guests, and even suggesting menu improvements to our head chefs. She has your eye for detail, Charles would say proudly, watching 10-year-old Penelope rearrange the lobby flowers into a more pleasing arrangement. And your head for numbers, I'd reply, finding her calculating profit margins on restaurant receipts. But somewhere between her expensive boarding school years and her Ivy League MBA, Penelope began to see our work differently. The hotels that had once seemed magical to her became quaint and old-fashioned. The hands-on approach Charles and I valued became micromanagement. The personal relationships we maintained with staff and long-term guests became inefficient sentimentality. After Charles passed 4 years ago, suddenly, peacefully, in his sleep after a day spent touring our newest property, Penelope suggested I might want to step back from active management. "You've done enough, Mother," she said during the reading of the will. "You deserve to rest. Let the professionals handle the day-to-day operations." What she didn't know, what no one knew except our family attorney, Harold Westbrook, was that Charles had restructured everything the year before he died. Every property, every contract, every licensing agreement was transferred into my name alone. Not because he didn't trust Penelope, but because he'd seen the same changes in her that I had. The gradual shift from building something meaningful to simply maximizing profit. The impatience with the slower, more personal approach that had made us successful. "She'll learn," he'd told me privately, "but she needs to learn what it means to earn trust, not inherit it." So I let her believe what she wanted to believe. That I was the grieving widow, the former hotel manager who'd gotten lucky with a good marriage, the woman who needed guidance and protection from the complex world of business. I attended the monthly board meeting she arranged, nodded thoughtfully at her presentations about modernizing our approach, and signed the documents she placed in front of me without argument. I never told her that I owned everything. Every brick, every deed, every trademark, every account. She assumed that, as Charles's heir, she was inheriting a business partnership. She had no idea she was inheriting precisely nothing unless I chose to give it to her. For 4 years, I watched her work. She was smart, efficient, and undeniably talented. She modernized our booking systems, negotiated better vendor contracts, and increased our overall profitability by 18%. But she also eliminated the personal touches that had defined our brand. No more handwritten welcome notes for returning guests. No more chef's special requests for dietary restrictions. No more holiday bonuses for housekeeping staff who'd been with us for decades. "It's not personal, Mother," she'd explain when I raised gentle concerns. "It's business. Sentiment doesn't scale." 6 months ago, Penelope announced her engagement to Thaddeus Pemberton III. Heir to a commercial real estate fortune and everything our family had never been. Flashy, entitled, and utterly convinced of his own importance. Their engagement party was held at our flagship property, the Grandview Manor, without anyone asking my permission. I arrived to find myself seated at table 9 between the hotel's head of maintenance and Thaddeus's great aunt, who spent the evening complaining about the wine selection. That's when I realized I wasn't just being set aside. I was being written out of the story entirely. The wedding was scheduled for December 15th at Grandview Manor's Crystal Ballroom, a $180,000 celebration that Penelope planned down to the last detail without consulting me once. When I offered to contribute, to pay for something, anything, as a mother's gift, she patted my hand condescendingly. "That's very sweet, Mother, but Thaddeus's family is handling everything. We wouldn't want you to strain your finances." My finances? The woman was planning her wedding at my hotel using my staff, and she was worried about my finances. I should have spoken up then. Should have reminded her who signed the paychecks, who held the insurance policies, who had built everything she was now treating as her personal playground. Instead, I smiled, nodded, and went home to my quiet house on the hill overlooking the original Pine Valley property, where Charles and I had first learned that love and business could coexist beautifully when built on mutual respect. I never imagined she would go as far as uninviting me entirely. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before the wedding. Not a phone call, not a conversation, an email. Formal, cold, and utterly final. The subject line read, "Wedding update, important." I read it 3 times before the words sunk in. "After careful consideration, unnecessary tension, respect our decision." As if I were a problematic vendor to be managed, not the mother who had given her everything. I set down my coffee cup, the same white porcelain set Charles and I had used every morning for 32 years, and walked to the window. Down the hill, I could see the lights of Grandview Manor's main building, where my daughter was planning to celebrate the happiest day of her life without me. For the first time since Charles died, I felt completely alone. But as I stood there, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold behind our first property, I remembered something he used to say. The quietest people hold the loudest keys, Rosalind. Never forget that. I hadn't forgotten. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to use them. We poured our hearts into researching and telling the story. If you're hooked, show some love with a subscribe. Now, where were we? I read the email again, hoping I had misunderstood something. The words remained unchanged. Each one a small blade cutting deeper with every reading. Dear Mother, after careful consideration with Thaddeus and his family, we've decided your presence at the wedding would create unnecessary tension during what should be our perfect day. We know you'll understand and respect our decision. We appreciate everything you've done, but we need to start our marriage surrounded only by those who truly support our future together. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Penelope. Unnecessary tension, perfect day, those who truly support our future. Each phrase was carefully chosen, designed to sound reasonable, while delivering an unreasonable message. I wasn't being uninvited because of anything I'd done. I was being uninvited because of who I was, or rather, who they thought I was. The woman who grieved too long, the woman who asked too many questions about business decisions, the woman who reminded them of an older, simpler way of doing things, the woman who didn't fit into Thaddeus's vision of his new family's image. I walked to Charles's study, a room I'd tapped exactly as he'd left it. His reading glasses still sat folded on his mahogany desk next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. I pulled out his leather chair and sat down, the familiar creak of the hinges somehow comforting. This was where he'd made the decision to put everything in my name. This was where he'd protected me, even though I hadn't fully understood it at the time. The phone rang. Penelope's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to her message. Mother, I hope you got my email. I know this is difficult, but please try to understand. Thaddeus's mother has some very specific ideas about family dynamics, and she's concerned about appearances. You know how you can get emotional when you talk about Daddy, and we just can't risk any disruptions. The photographer is costing us $15,000, and we need every shot to be perfect. I'm sure you understand. Please don't call me back upset. I need to stay focused on the final preparations.
Emotional. Disruptions. Appearances. She spoke about me like I was an unstable child who might throw a tantrum at an adult gathering. The woman who had built a hospitality empire from nothing was now seen as a liability to a wedding being held at her own property. I saved the voicemail and immediately called Harold Westbrook, our family attorney. He answered on the second ring. Rosalind, what can I do for you? Harold, I need you to pull all the contracts related to the December 15th wedding at Grandview Manor. Everything. Catering, flowers, photography, music, accommodations. I want to see exactly what's been arranged and who authorized it. There was a pause. May I ask why? Because I've just been uninvited to my own daughter's wedding at my own hotel, and I need to understand the scope of what's happening on my property without my knowledge. Harold's intake of breath was sharp. I'll have everything pulled within 2 hours. Rosalind, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Neither did I, Harold. Neither did I. After hanging up, I walked through the house Charles and I had shared for 34 years. Every room held memories of Penelope's childhood. The kitchen where she'd stood on a step stool to help me bake cookies for hotel guests. The living room where she'd practiced her piano recitals before performing them in Grandview Manor's lobby. The sunroom where she'd spent hours drawing elaborate plans for improvements to our properties, her 10-year-old handwriting carefully labeling everything from bigger pools to more fancy chandeliers. When had she stopped seeing this as her home and started seeing it as something to escape from? The answer came to me as I stood in her old bedroom, now converted to a guest room, but still containing her high school debate trophies and college graduation photos. It was when she started bringing Thaddeus around. The way he would survey our house with barely concealed disdain, commenting on the charming vintage fixtures and cozy proportions in tones that made both words sound like criticisms. I remembered the first time he'd visited Grandview Manor, walking through the lobby like he was cataloging everything that needed to be replaced. "You could really maximize this space," he'd told Penelope, loudly enough for the front desk staff to hear. "Tear out these heavy drapes, update the lighting, get rid of all this dark wood, make it feel more contemporary." The heavy drapes were custom made from fabric Charles and I had selected during our honeymoon in Ireland. The lighting fixtures were restored from a 1920s theater in Chicago. The dark wood was hand-carved by local artisans who had become friends over the decades of working with us. But to Thaddeus, it was all just old stuff taking up space. Harold called back exactly 2 hours later. "Rosalind, you need to see this in person. Can you come to my office?" 20 minutes later, I sat across from Harold's desk, staring at a stack of contracts 3 inches thick. Every vendor, every service, every detail of Penelope's wedding had been arranged through corporate accounts I hadn't authorized. More than that, several contracts had been signed with my forged signature. "They've essentially planned a $180,000 wedding on your credit," he said carefully. "The catering contract alone is $48,000. The floral arrangements are $22,000. And look at this," he slid a paper across the desk. "They've booked the entire east wing of the hotel for 3 nights for the wedding party and out-of-town guests. 37 rooms at premium rates." I studied the signature at the bottom of the accommodation contract. It looked like mine, but I'd never seen this document in my life. "Harold, I didn't sign any of these." "I didn't think you had, but here's the problem. Legally, as the owner of Grandview Hospitality, you're liable for all of it unless you can prove fraud. And even if you could prove fraud, would you really want to press charges against your own daughter 3 weeks before her wedding?" I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of manipulation settle around me like a heavy coat. They hadn't just uninvited me from the wedding, they'd stolen my signature, used my credit, and planned to use my property, all while treating me like an embarrassing relative who needed to be managed from a distance. "There's something else," Harold said quietly. "I've been doing some research on the Pemberton family. Thaddeus's trust fund has some restrictions. He doesn't get full access to his inheritance until he's married, and there are conditions about the type of wedding he has. It needs to be at a prestigious venue with appropriate accommodations for family members. If he doesn't meet these requirements, his inheritance is delayed by 5 years." The pieces clicked into place. They weren't just using my hotel because it was convenient. They were using it because Thaddeus needed it to access his money. I was being used as a prop in someone else's financial planning. "So let me understand this correctly," I said slowly. "My daughter has forged my signature to arrange a wedding I'm not invited to at a hotel I own to help her fiancé access his trust fund?" Harold nodded grimly. "That appears to be the situation." I stood up and walked to Harold's window, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Penelope was probably meeting with the photographer or tasting cake samples, entirely confident that her mother would quietly accept this humiliation because that's what grieving widows do. They fade into the background and let other people make the important decisions. "Harold, I want you to do something for me."
Of course. I want you to prepare termination letters for every single vendor contract related to this wedding. I want them ready to send by tomorrow morning. Harold's pen stopped moving. "Rosalind, are you sure about this? This will effectively cancel the entire wedding." I turned back to face him, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt completely clear about what needed to happen. "Harold, they've already canceled the wedding I was supposed to attend. They just forgot to tell the vendors." That evening, I poured myself a glass of the wine Charles and I had shared on our anniversary every year, a bottle from the vineyard where we'd gotten engaged. I sat in his chair, looking out at the lights of Grandview Manor in the distance, and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to fight them. I wasn't going to argue or plead or try to convince them to include me. I was simply going to stop pretending I didn't hold all the keys. Tomorrow, Penelope would learn that being uninvited from your own property has consequences. And Thaddeus would discover that access to trust funds requires more than just a prestigious address. It requires the permission of the person who actually owns the prestige. I raised my glass toward the window, toward the lights of the empire Charles and I had built together. Here's to quiet power, my love, and to daughters who are about to learn that some doors only open from the inside. I woke at dawn with absolute clarity, the kind of clear-minded certainty that only comes after a night of real decision-making, not the restless tossing that follows doubt. I had work to do. Harold arrived at my house at 7:30 with a briefcase full of termination documents and a thermos of coffee that told me he'd been up as late as I had, preparing for what we both knew would be a decisive day. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Rosalind?" he asked as we spread the papers across my dining room table. "Once these letters are sent, there's no walking it back quietly. This will create immediate and very public consequences." I picked up Charles's fountain pen, the Mont Blanc he'd used to sign every major contract for 30 years. It felt heavier than usual, weighted with the gravity of what I was about to do. "Harold, they've already canceled the wedding I was supposed to attend. They just forgot to tell the vendors." I uncapped the pen. "I'm not walking anything back. I'm walking forward." The first letter was to Pemberton Catering Services, the high-end company Thaddeus's mother had insisted upon. $48,000 for a 7-course dinner that would have fed twice as many people as were actually invited. The contract cancellation was clean and legal. They'd exceeded their authority by using forged documentation. The second letter went to Avalon's Florals. $22,000 for imported orchids and roses arranged in designs that required 3 full-time florists for 2 days of setup. Gone. Photography by Sterling Studios. $15,000 for what Penelope had described as the most important documentation of our lives. The irony wasn't lost on me that she wanted perfect documentation of a day I wasn't allowed to witness. One by one, I signed the cancellation letters. Musicians, linens, specialty lighting, even the horse-drawn carriage Thaddeus had insisted upon for their grand exit. Each signature felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me without permission. But the final letter was the most important one. The letter to myself, as owner of Grandview Manor, canceling the venue reservation entirely. "This one will hurt the most," Harold warned. "The venue is the cornerstone. Without it, everything else becomes impossible to reschedule at this notice." "That's exactly the point," I said, and signed my name with steady strokes. Harold gathered the letters and checked his watch. "The courier service opens at 9. These will all be delivered by noon." "Perfect. That gives me time for one more thing." After Harold left, I drove to Grandview Manor for the first time in 3 weeks. I had been avoiding it, unable to bear the sight of wedding preparations happening in my own lobby. But today, I needed to see it with new eyes. I parked in my usual spot, the one marked reserved for R. Blackthorn, that Penelope probably assumed was just an old plaque nobody had bothered to change. Walking through the main entrance, I was struck by how beautiful the preparation had been. Penelope had excellent taste, I had to admit. The floral arrangements in the lobby were elegant and sophisticated. Even the staff seemed to move with extra purpose and pride. It was going to be a beautiful wedding. It was a shame I wasn't invited to see it.
I smiled. Smart photographer. He'd actually read the fine print. "Don't worry about it, Catherine. I'll handle the vendor issues myself." "Oh, thank goodness. Should I call Miss Penelope and let her know you're taking care of everything?" "No," I said gently. "Let me surprise her." I spent the next hour walking through every space where the wedding events were planned. The crystal ballroom had been transformed into something magical. Round tables with ivory linens, centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath, strings of warm lights creating an almost fairy tale atmosphere. The adjacent cocktail lounge had been set up for the reception, with a live band area and a dance floor that would accommodate all 93 guests comfortably. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect. The kind of wedding every bride dreams of having. Standing in the center of the ballroom, I pulled out my phone and dialed Penelope's number. This time, I knew she would answer. Her wedding was in 4 days, and she couldn't afford to ignore calls from vendors. Hello? Her voice was tense, distracted. Penelope, it's your mother. A pause. Mother, I really can't talk right now. I'm dealing with some vendor issues and everything is falling apart. The caterer is asking for additional signatures, the florist is talking about contract discrepancies, and the photographer is being completely unreasonable about authorization procedures. I know. I'm standing in the crystal ballroom right now looking at all your beautiful work. Another pause, longer this time. You're at the hotel? I'm at my hotel, yes, and I have to say you've done an absolutely stunning job with the planning. The floral arrangements are exquisite. The lighting is perfect. The table settings are elegant and sophisticated. Mother, what are you doing there? I wanted to see it one last time before everything gets taken down. Taken down? What are you talking about? I walked to the head table, running my hand along the ivory linen that would have seated the bride and groom. Well, darling, when you cancel a wedding, you have to remove all the decorations. Hotel policy. The silence on the other end of the phone was so complete I could hear her breathing. Cancel? She finally whispered. Oh, yes. As of noon today, every vendor contract for December 15th has been terminated. Catering, flowers, photography, music, transportation, even the venue reservation itself. I picked up one of the white roses from a centerpiece and inhaled its fragrance. Gorgeous flowers, by the way. It's a shame they'll have to be removed. You can't do that. Her voice was shaking now. You can't just cancel my wedding. I didn't cancel your wedding, sweetheart. I canceled the vendors who were working at my hotel without my authorization. You're perfectly free to get married anywhere you'd like, just not here. But all the contracts were signed with forged signatures. Harold has the handwriting analysis ready if anyone wants to contest the cancellations, though I suspect most vendors would prefer to simply reschedule rather than deal with fraud investigations. I could hear her crying now, soft gasps that might have moved me a week ago. Today, they sounded like the tears of someone who was finally understanding the consequences of their choices. Mother, you can't do this to me. The wedding is in 4 days. 4 days. Do you have any idea how impossible it will be to find another venue, another caterer, another photographer? About as impossible as it was for me to understand why my only daughter would uninvite me from the most important day of her life. I can explain that. No need to explain, Penelope. Your email was very clear. Unnecessary tension, perfect day, appropriate family members only. I understand completely. I walked toward the ballroom's French doors, which opened onto the garden terrace where Charles and I had been married 34 years ago, where I had promised to love him for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, where we had kept those promises for 30 years until death parted us. I just want you to understand something too. When you treat people like they're disposable, you shouldn't be surprised when they stop providing things you can't dispose of. What is that supposed to mean? It means that respect isn't optional, darling. It's the price of admission. And you forgot to pay it. I could hear her sobbing freely now, and part of me, the mother part that had rocked her to sleep when she had nightmares, that had driven her to emergency rooms with fevers and to college interviews with encouragement, wanted to comfort her. But a larger part of me, the part that had built a business empire from nothing and learned to value dignity over sentiment, knew that some lessons could only be learned the hard way. You can fix this, she said desperately. You can call them back. You can tell them it was a mistake. I could, I agreed, but I won't. Why not? I stepped out onto the terrace, looking at the garden where Charles had promised to love me for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. where I had promised the same thing back to him, where we had kept those promises for 30 years until death parted us. Because, Penelope, love isn't supposed to be conditional, and respect isn't supposed to be optional. Your father taught me that. I tried to teach it to you, but apparently you need to learn it the hard way. I hung up before she could respond, turned off my phone, and walked back through the ballroom one more time. Tomorrow, all of this would be gone. The flowers would be donated to the local hospital, the linens would be cleaned and returned to storage, the lights would be reset to their normal configuration. And somewhere else, in some other venue, my daughter would learn whether the love she'd chosen was strong enough to survive disappointment, whether the man she was marrying valued her enough to stand beside her when the perfect day became an imperfect scramble, whether the family she was trying so hard to impress would support her when she needed help instead of judgment. I hoped they would. I genuinely hoped that Thaddeus would prove to be the kind of man who could turn disaster into adventure, who could find a justice of the peace in a small restaurant and make magic out of chaos. But if he wasn't that kind of man, it was better for Penelope to find out now, before she legally tied herself to someone who only wanted her when everything was perfect. I locked the ballroom doors behind me and walked back to my car, feeling lighter than I had in months. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, I was going home to have dinner in the kitchen where Charles and I had shared 30 years of conversations, to sleep in the bed where we had dreamed our dreams together, and to wake up in a world where my daughter would finally understand that some doors only open when you treat the person holding the key with the respect they deserve. The quiet revolution had begun. The first call came at 6:17 the following morning. Thaddeus, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Mrs. Blackthorne, there's been some kind of mistake. Our caterer says all contracts have been terminated, but that's impossible. We have a wedding in 3 days. I was sitting in my garden with my morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold behind Grandview Manor. The view had never looked more peaceful. There's no mistake, Thaddeus. The contracts were terminated because they were unauthorized. Unauthorized? What are you talking about? Penelope arranged everything months ago. Penelope arranged everything using forged signatures and fraudulent documentation. My attorney has copies of the handwriting analysis if you'd like to see them. The silence stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, his voice came back, different now, colder. You're canceling your daughter's wedding because of paperwork technicalities? I'm protecting my business from fraud. The fact that it happens to be my daughter committing the fraud is unfortunate but irrelevant. This is insane. You can't do this to her, to us. I didn't do anything to you, Thaddeus. You did it to yourselves when you decided I wasn't worthy of an invitation to my own daughter's wedding at my own hotel. He hung up without another word. I sipped my coffee and waited for the next call. It came 20 minutes later. Vivian Pemberton, Thaddeus's mother. Her voice dripping with the kind of aristocratic outrage that only comes from a lifetime of getting your way through intimidation. Rosalind, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this childish tantrum ends now. You will restore all vendor contracts immediately, or I will ensure that every society family in the state knows exactly what kind of unstable woman you are. Vivian, I said pleasantly, I've been called worse things by better people. Your threats don't concern me. My son's trust fund requires this wedding to take place at a prestigious venue. If you sabotage that, you're stealing from his future. Your son's trust fund is not my responsibility. Perhaps if you'd raised him to value relationships over money, he wouldn't need my venue to access his inheritance. How dare you? How dare I what? Expect basic respect from people using my property? How dare I require actual authorization before allowing strangers to forge my signature? How dare I insist on being invited to events I'm paying for? Her voice turned venomous. You're a bitter old woman who can't stand to see young people happy. I'm a business owner who doesn't work for free. especially for people who treat me like furniture." I hung up and turned off my phone. Let them rage at voicemail for a while. By noon, the story had begun to spread. Harold called on my landline to report that 3 different wedding vendors had contacted him asking for clarification about the cancellations. Word was circulating through the tight-knit luxury wedding industry that something dramatic had happened with the Pemberton Blackthorn wedding. The florist wants to know if she should donate the flowers or try to resell them. The photographer is asking if he can use the venue next weekend for a different client. And the caterer, he paused, the caterer wants to know if you'd be interested in hosting a different event this Saturday. Apparently, they have another client looking for an upscale venue on short notice. Tell them all they're free to pursue other opportunities. The venue is available. Rosalind, you should know that inquiries are being made. Society reporters, wedding bloggers, someone called asking if it's true that you canceled your own daughter's wedding. What did you tell them? That Grandview Hospitality doesn't comment on private family matters. But this story is going to get out. These people don't know how to keep quiet. He was right. By evening, the first blog post appeared online. Wedding drama rocks high society. Mother cancels daughter's $200,000 celebration. The details were wrong. They'd inflated the cost and gotten several names confused, but the basic story was there. An unnamed source was quoted saying the mother had lost her mind with grief and was punishing her daughter for imagined slights.
The second article appeared the next morning, this one more accurate and far more damaging. Inside the Pemberton Blackthorn wedding disaster, forged signatures and family betrayal. Someone had leaked the actual story, complete with details about the unauthorized contracts and the fact that I owned Grandview Hospitality outright. I was reading it over breakfast when my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Penelope standing on my porch, still in the same clothes she'd been wearing yesterday. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she was holding what looked like a newspaper. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Mother," her voice was hoarse, "we need to talk." "Do we?" "Please, just let me explain." I stepped aside and let her enter, more from curiosity than compassion. She collapsed onto my living room couch like her strings had been cut. "Everything is ruined," she whispered. "Everything. The venues we've called are either booked or too expensive. The vendors who are still available are third-rate. Thaddeus is—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Thaddeus is what?" "He's angry. Really angry. He says I lied to him about my family, about my connections, about my ability to handle things. His mother is threatening to cut him off completely if this becomes more of a scandal." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "His trust fund has a morality clause. If the family decides he's married someone who brings shame to the Pemberton name, they can revoke his access indefinitely." The irony was breathtaking. They'd been so concerned about my ability to embarrass them that they'd created a situation far more embarrassing than anything I could have done simply by attending quietly. "So, fix it," I said simply. "How? How do I fix this? We've tried calling every venue within 200 miles. Do you know what a wedding costs when you only have 3 days' notice? Do you know how much vendors charge for rush service?" "About as much as it costs to forge someone's signature and use their property without permission, I'd imagine." She flinched. "I didn't mean for it to be fraud. I thought you wouldn't mind. You've always been so generous, so supportive. I thought if I just handled everything quietly, you'd be okay with it." "You thought I wouldn't mind paying for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend?" "I thought you would understand that sometimes family has to make sacrifices for the greater good." "Whose greater good, Penelope? Yours? Thaddeus's? His mother's? Because I'm having trouble seeing how uninviting me served anyone's good except your own convenience." She started crying again, deep sobs that shook her whole body. "I don't know what to do. Thaddeus is talking about postponing everything, maybe eloping instead. His family is furious with me. My friends are reading about this in gossip blogs.
Everyone knows I can't even manage my own wedding. You managed it fine. You just managed it without considering that other people have rights and feelings. I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong, but please, can't you fix this? Can't you call the vendors back? Can't you restore the venue booking? I'll do anything, pay any penalty fees, sign any contracts you want. I studied my daughter's face, looking for something I wasn't sure I'd find. Genuine remorse, perhaps. Real understanding of what she'd done wrong. An acknowledgement that went deeper than regret about getting caught. Penelope, answer me honestly. If none of this had happened, if all your vendor contracts had gone smoothly, if no one had discovered the forged signatures, if your wedding had proceeded exactly as planned, would you have ever regretted uninviting me? She opened her mouth immediately, then closed it. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, then away again. I thought it was for the best. That's not what I asked. A long pause. I don't know. Maybe not. I was so focused on making everything perfect, on impressing Thaddeus's family, on proving I could handle sophisticated events. You represented complications. Complications. You ask a lot of questions about business decisions. You remember stories that make people uncomfortable. You talk about Daddy in ways that make Vivian flinch. You're just more emotional than they're used to. There it was, the truth I've been waiting to hear. I wasn't being excluded because of what I'd done. I was being excluded because of who I was. The woman who grieved openly. The woman who asked inconvenient questions. The woman who remembered when things were different. So the answer is no, I said quietly. She didn't respond, which was answer enough. Then I can't help you, sweetheart. What do you mean? I mean that I can't restore contracts for someone who sees me as a complication to be managed. I can't provide venue space for someone who considers my presence disruptive. And I can't rescue a wedding that was planned specifically to exclude me. But I'm your daughter. Yes, you are. And I love you. But love doesn't mean allowing people to use you without consequences. Your father taught me that. I stood up, walking to the window that looked out over the valley where Charles and I had built our life together. You have two choices, Penelope. You can find a way to have the wedding you want without my help, which will teach you something about the real cost of your decisions, or you can postpone everything, take time to think about what kind of marriage you actually want to build and what kind of family you want to be part of.
Those aren't real choices. Thaddeus will never agree to postpone. His family will never accept anything less than perfect. Then maybe you need to ask yourself if you're marrying the right family. She stared at me, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been recognition. You're really not going to help me? I'm helping you in the only way that matters. I'm showing you what happens when you treat people as disposable. Consider it a wedding gift. She laughed without saying goodbye, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I watched her drive away, then called Harold to let him know that any further vendor inquiries should be directed to the bride herself. By evening, the third article had appeared online. This one included quotes from unnamed sources describing Thaddeus as reconsidering his options and Vivian Pemberton as exploring legal remedies for what she considers elder abuse. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my porch, watching the lights come on in Grandview Manor below. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The woman who had built an empire from nothing. The woman who had loved deeply and lost gracefully. The woman who knew the difference between being generous and being taken advantage of. The woman who understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to learn from their own mistakes. 6 months passed in unexpected peace. I threw myself into renovating the original Pine Valley property, the little motor lodge where Charles and I had first learned to build something beautiful together. The 12 rooms became 6 luxury suites, each one designed with the kind of personal touches that modern hotels had forgotten. handwritten welcome notes, locally sourced amenities, and staff who remembered your name from visit to visit. The work felt like coming home to myself. Every morning, I drove down the mountain to supervise contractors, meet with designers, and taste test recipes with our new chef. The staff treated me not like a grieving widow to be managed, but like the owner who had built their livelihood with careful hands and steady vision. I didn't hear from Penelope during those months. Harold occasionally updated me on legal matters. The Pemberton family had indeed threatened lawsuits, but their attorney had quickly advised them that fraud charges against Penelope would be far more damaging than quietly dropping the matter. Thaddeus's trust fund had been frozen pending a family review of his judgment and character, which apparently included marrying someone who brought scandal to the Pemberton name. The wedding, according to the society blogs that I definitely wasn't reading, but that Harold definitely was, had been postponed indefinitely. Some reports suggested the couple had eloped to Las Vegas. Others claimed they'd broken up entirely. I found I cared less about the truth than I had expected to. On a crisp October morning, as I was reviewing paint samples for the Pine Valley lobby, Catherine Morrison approached me with an envelope. This was delivered to the front desk at Grandview Manor. Hand-delivered, no postmark. The couriers said it was urgent but not emergency. The envelope was cream-colored linen paper, expensive but not ostentatious. My name was written across the front in Penelope's careful handwriting, not the hurried scrawl she used for business notes, but the precise lettering I'd taught her for thank you cards when she was 8 years old. Inside was a single photograph and a letter. The photograph showed a small ceremony in what looked like a courthouse or city hall. Penelope in a simple white dress holding a bouquet of daisies. Beside her stood a man I didn't recognize. Not Thaddeus, but someone younger, with kind eyes and a genuine smile. They were both laughing at something outside the frame, and Penelope looked happier than I'd seen her in years. The letter was 2 pages, written in the same careful script. Dear Mother, I don't know if you'll read this or if you'll care about what I have to say, but I needed to write it anyway for both of us. You were right about everything. About Thaddeus, about his family, about what I was becoming. The woman who could uninvite her own mother from her wedding was not someone I recognized, but she was someone I had chosen to be, and that choice had consequences I never imagined.
I found work at a small event planning company downtown. Not glamorous work, birthday parties and retirement celebrations mostly, but honest work, where I had to earn respect instead of assuming it. My supervisor is a woman named Carol Chen, who built her business from nothing over 20 years. She doesn't care who my family is or what hotels we own. She cares whether I show up on time, treat clients with respect, and deliver what I promise. Working for someone else taught me things about business I never learned in our family meetings, about the difference between managing people and leading them, about earning loyalty versus demanding it, about the 1,000 small kindnesses that build trust over time. 6 weeks ago, I met David Martinez at a community center wedding we were coordinating. He's a social worker, divorced, with an 8-year-old daughter named Sophia. He's never heard of Grandview Hospitality, and when I told him about our family business, he was more interested in how we treated our housekeeping staff than how many properties we owned. We got married last Friday at the courthouse. Just us, Sophia, and 2 witnesses we asked from the hallway. No photographers, no flowers, no reception. Afterward, we had pizza at Sophia's favorite restaurant and went to see a movie she'd been wanting to watch. It was perfect. Not because everything went according to plan, but because it was real. David married me, not my family connections. Sophia accepted me because I listened to her stories and remembered her favorite ice cream flavor, not because I could provide access to luxury hotels. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't undo the hurt I caused or excuse the choices I made. But I want you to know that I understand now what I lost when I decided you were a complication instead of a blessing. I understand that you weren't trying to control my wedding. You were trying to love me in the only way you knew how. And I understand that when I shut you out,
I was rejecting not just your presence, but everything you had taught me about family, loyalty, and treating people with dignity. If you're willing, I would like to introduce you to David and Sophia. Not because I need your approval or your financial support, but because I want them to meet the woman who built something beautiful from nothing and taught her daughter, eventually, that respect is earned, not inherited. I hope you're well. I hope the Pine Valley renovation is everything you envisioned, and I hope that someday you might be proud of the woman I'm trying to become. With love and respect I should have shown long ago, Penelope. I read the letter twice, then set it down, and picked up the photograph again. The happiness in Penelope's face was unmistakable, not the performed joy of a society bride, but the genuine delight of a woman who had found something real. I walked to the window overlooking the valley where Charles and I had built our life together. The autumn light was golden, painting everything warm and forgiving. I asked the empty room, addressing the question to Charles as I had so many times over the past 6 months. What do you think? Has she learned enough? The answer came not in words, but in memory. Charles at our own simple wedding, promising to love me not for what I could provide, but for who I was. Charles teaching Penelope to tie her shoes, patiently working through the loops and knots until she could do it herself. Charles on his deathbed squeezing my hand and whispering, "Give her time to grow into the woman we raised her to be." I picked up the phone and dialed the number Penelope had written at the bottom of her letter. She answered on the second ring, her voice tentative. "Hello? It's your mother." A sharp intake of breath. "Mother, did you get my letter?" "I did, and I'd very much like to meet David and Sophia. Are you free for Sunday dinner? Nothing fancy, just pot roast and good conversation." She started crying, not the desperate sobs of 6 months ago, but the quiet tears of relief and gratitude. "We'd love that," she whispered. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me another chance. We're family, Penelope. Family gives chances. That's what we do." After we hung up, I walked back to the paint samples, but my mind was already moving to Sunday's menu. Pot roast with Charles's secret ingredient, mashed potatoes the way Penelope liked them as a child, apple pie made from the trees Charles and I had planted in our first year of marriage. A meal to welcome new family members. A table set for forgiveness and fresh starts. Harold called that afternoon to discuss some business matters, and I mentioned Penelope's visit. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked gently. "It's been a difficult 6 months. Harold, holding grudges is exhausting, and life is too short to waste time on anger when you could spend it on love." Very wise. Charles would be proud of how you've handled all this. Charles would be proud of who Penelope is becoming. That's what matters. Sunday arrived clear and bright. I set the dining room table with our good china, the set Charles and I had received as a wedding gift and saved for special occasions that never seemed special enough. Today felt special enough.
They arrived at noon, Penelope carrying flowers from a roadside stand, David with a bottle of wine and a shy smile, and Sophia clutching a drawing she'd made of what she imagined my house would look like. "It's even prettier than I drew," Sophia announced, studying the actual house with serious 8-year-old eyes. "Do you really own all those hotels my new mom talks about?" "I do. Would you like to see one sometime?" Her eyes went wide. "Could I really?" "Sophia loves hotels," David explained. "She collects those little soaps and shampoos whenever we travel." "Then we'll have to make sure you get the complete collection," I said, and meant it. Over dinner, I watched Penelope with new eyes. She cut Sophia's meat without being asked. She listened when David talked about his work with foster children. She asked questions about my renovation project that showed she understood not just the business implications, but the emotional significance of returning to where Charles and I had started. This was the daughter I had raised. Somewhere under the social climbing and image management, she had always been there. She just needed time and space to remember who she was. After dinner, while David and Sophia explored the garden, Penelope helped me clear the dishes. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly as we worked. "Not just for the wedding, but for years of taking you for granted. for treating your generosity like an obligation instead of a gift. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. You just owe yourself the promise to do better going forward. I want to earn my place in the business again. Not have it handed to me, but earn it. Learn it from the ground up the way you and Daddy did. I smiled, remembering the young woman who had once rearranged lobby flowers and calculated profit margins for fun. There's a management position opening at Pine Valley when the renovation is complete. Assistant to the general manager. It's hard work, long hours, and you'll be starting at the bottom. Interested? Her face lit up with the first genuine enthusiasm I'd seen from her about the business in years. Yes, absolutely. Through the window, I could see David pushing Sophia on the swing Charles had hung from the old oak tree 30 years ago. Sophia's laughter echoed across the garden, bright and musical. They're good for you, I observed. They love me for reasons that have nothing to do with money or status or family connections. It's terrifying and wonderful. That's how you know it's real. We finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and I marveled at how natural it felt to have family filling my house again. Not the performance of family, but the reality of it. Messy and imperfect and absolutely precious. As they prepared to leave, Sophia hugged me with the unself-conscious affection that only children possess. "Thank you for the hotel soap," she whispered, "and for making my new mom happy again." "Thank you for bringing her back to me," I whispered back. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, looking down at the lights of Grandview Manor and thinking about second chances, about the difference between forgiveness and forgetting, about the courage it takes to admit you were wrong and the grace it takes to welcome someone home. I thought about Charles and how proud he would be of the family we had built together. Not perfect, but real. Not without scars, but stronger for having survived them. And I thought about the little girl who used to help me fold napkins and arrange flowers, who had grown into a woman wise enough to choose love over luxury, respect over reputation, and truth over convenience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose grace over grievance, understanding over anger. But tonight, I was simply grateful. For family found again, for love that survives disappointment, and for the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best revenge is living well and loving widely. The mountain air was crisp and clean, full of promise. In the distance, I could hear the sound of laughter from the hotel below, guests enjoying an evening they would remember fondly. Charles and I had built something that would outlast both of us. Not just a business, but a legacy of hospitality, kindness, and the radical act of making strangers feel welcome. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.